Okay, and then Jolene, you're going to keep an eye in chat for me, are you?
I absolutely am.
Thank you.
And I will chime in with audio if there's anything that I need to, but I will turn my camera off for the sake of kind of simplifying what y'all are looking at, because I'm not the important part here. So
Sure you are.
all right, everybody. I'm going to hand things off to you, Angie.
All righty. Thanks, Jolene. All right. Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your evening this evening to join us. And I'll just give you a quick rundown of the evening. If you have your cameras handy or have cameras, that'll be great, because there will be an opportunity for some hands-on practice and just, pushing the buttons, turning some dials. So my plan is we'll go over a couple of just the kind of essential beginner basics just to get started. And then my plan is to introduce you to kind of the four, there's almost five, but what I kind of refer to as kind of the four main features of your camera. So, time will be limited, but my goal is that you will at least become aware of them and have an introduction. So by that, I mean, to begin with, we'll address what your camera is doing in the automatic mode, how it's helping you, sometimes how it appears that it's not, and what's going on. Then we'll switch over to what's called the aperture priority mode. So that's like a semi-automatic mode where you get to make some of the decisions, and then the camera is going to help you out by counterbalancing, if you will, the other side of the equation that I'm going to explain to you here and show you as we go. And then I'll also have some example photos to show you. So if I'm explaining a technique, for example, in aperture priority, or a type of look or mood you can get to your photo, then I will show you some examples. And then we'll jump into the shutter speed priority. So I'll talk about what that is, adjustments within your camera, how to use it. Again, some examples of shutter speed, using a slow shutter speed for effects, a fast shutter speed, and just helping to determine what is it that you want to capture and how do you want to capture it. Okay, and from there, we will jump into the full manual mode. So that is where you get to adjust the aperture and the aperture and the shutter speed for the effects that you want. So it could be maybe a lighting challenge, and you want to just be able to control that more with the full manual settings. Or it could just become one of the features or the modes that you prefer to shoot in, but I will tie that in so you can see how that works. And then I will cover a little bit about the lens, because the type of lens that you have can affect your exposure or your lighting, so how light or dark your photo appears. And I'll filter in and pepper with some composition tips for you, just some suggestions on why I think this is perhaps I don't like to necessarily use the word a better composition, but where you can just see the differences. I chose this as an optimum composition for, say, some of my images versus, A versus B. And then you get to determine, because this is about you and the kind of photos you like to take, what works for you. Okay, and then I'll wrap up with another slideshow, just showing you some composition examples, some lighting exposure. And then, because I think that file size, or understanding a little bit about the file size or setting that you're shooting with, I'll get to that at the very end, but just to make sure that I can get you through the other settings first. But we'll also just cover that, and I'll leave you with a tip for that at the end. And as Jolene mentioned, we'll have time for questions. As I go through here, if you have anything pressing, then, there's, where is it? At the bottom of your screen in reactions, there will be a hand, and it will say, I think it's hand up. Yeah, I think if you click on that, it will show the hand up, or you can just pop a message into chat, and Jolene will be looking after those for you. Okay, so even if you wouldn't mind just taking a second, putting into chat. Okay, thanks, Jolene. Is just how many of you have a camera with you this evening, or do all of you? Okay, awesome. Looking good. Plenty to choose from. Okay, sounds good. All right. So one of the things I'm just going to cover on quickly here is if you have a viewfinder that even if you don't use it much, or if you prefer to use the screen on the back of your camera, but if you have a viewfinder on your camera that you use, then just quickly here, there's going to be a little toggle switch either beside or maybe on top of the viewfinder, depending on your camera model. And if you haven't discovered that before, or you're not aware of it, that little toggle switch beside your viewfinder, the purpose of that is as you turn it, or you can adjust it, so you use that to adjust how it looks through your viewfinder according to your eyesight. Okay, so it has no bearing on whether your photos will end up in focus or not. It's just a feature within your camera that will allow you to tweak how clear a photo looks when you're looking through that viewfinder. So sometimes your images, maybe you think they look a little fuzzy when you're looking through your viewfinder, but they look fine when you're reviewing them on your camera or on your computer. Then that viewfinder diopter is the one to check. I did have an incident one time where I was at a photo shoot, and it was for a hockey photo shoot. And it's like, wow, this is kind of strange because this is looking really blurry through my viewfinder, but my photos were looking in focus. I was doing just some pre-testing. And what I discovered in the end, somehow through the course of putting it in my camera bag or the camera or taking it out, I must have bumped the viewfinder diopter. So if you find that that happens, all of a sudden it's like it's becoming fuzzy or not as clear to look through, just check. It might just have been a slight adjustment to the viewfinder. Okay, all right, that's good, Denise. So you won't need to go and look for one, okay? Okay, so another tip I like to cover just right off the bat, we won't necessarily have you go through these steps if you have a memory card or SD storage card in your camera that currently you have photos on. But I'm just wondering if you'd like to put in chat for a minute, how many of you regularly or ever have formatted your memory card? Okay. Okay, so one of the reasons I bring this up is when you first purchase a memory card and it's brand new, one of the things you can do is if you just pop it into your camera and format it in your camera, then you are, I mean, as you've probably realized, the card will still work for the media card. But if you format your card before you take any photos and it's new, it will help prepare your card for use in your camera. And then moving forward, rather than deleting photos off your card, if every once in a while, after you make sure you have those images on your memory card backed up somewhere, at least in one, maybe even two places. So on your computer, on a maybe a USB stick, something like that. Because once you as you format your memory card, your photos are going to disappear. Okay, but the reason I like to bring this up is as you use your card and go through taking hundreds or even thousands of photos and continually delete, right? It's like little bits of picture file residue get left behind on your card. So it's one way I like to just think of helping to keep your card healthy. And then, you know, for any firmware updates, things like that, it's just a good habit. It's just a personal preference I have, is a good habit just to fairly regularly format your memory card. And again, you know, maybe depends how many photos you're taking and how often, but just to keep it in the back of your mind that it's a good thing to do. If you have not formatted your card, then it will be in the menu setting of your camera. And you will be asked, at least so far, I should say, you might want to check your camera manual, but any camera that I've seen or manual, the camera will tell you, the camera will come up that will say, are you sure you want to delete photos? Okay, and then you would choose that, choose yes if you are. If no, you would just ignore it and get yourself out of the setting. And it's a pretty quick process. When you hit yes, it will just clean those photos off the card and it's done. It's pretty slick. But as I say, you do want to make sure that you have saved those photos before you do that. Okay, so getting into, okay, I want to cover the lens, but I will introduce that after we get into the automatic setting. So how many of you, just even with a quick yes or no, how many of you tend to shoot mostly in the automatic setting, or have you experimented a bit with other settings? Okay, awesome. So one great thing, you know, with using auto is it does free you up to just be having fun and enjoying taking photos and not needing to necessarily concern yourself too much about the technicalities, if you will, of the camera setting. So when you're shooting in the automatic setting, your camera is taking care of, it's kind of a triangle of three particular points. I work mostly with two, but I will bring in the third one. So one of the settings it's taking care of is called the aperture, right? And we'll get into that more in the aperture priority. Okay, so the aperture is, so in your lens, you have overlapping blades. Okay, it's called the lens diaphragm. And those blades, so you can take those blades, right, and they'll expand, or you can close them in. You can get, for example, like a little pinhole like this, or, you know, a larger circle or space that light is coming into that lens. That is your aperture. So aperture controls the amount of light that's coming in through your lens. Okay, and the reason I mention that is because when you control that amount of light, you can do things like blur the background. You can use it to help with exposure if you need to reduce some light or introduce more light, you know, if your image is a little too dark. So I will show you in a minute here. I'll do a screen share and show you what to look for numbers. Okay, so in auto, the camera is taking care of aperture for you. Okay, the amount of light it thinks that it needs to bring in to give you what you want for an end result. It's interpreting your scene. Okay, so the partner to aperture is the shutter speed. And the shutter speed is about time. So the shutter speed will then determine how long are you letting the light come in through your lens. Okay, so for example, if you have seen those, the blurry water of waterfalls, right? It kind of just floats along. That's going to be a slower shutter speed. So your camera lens is going to stay open, let that light in for longer. And if you think of, say, sports at the Olympics, right, where maybe there's some downhill skiers and the photographers are going for freeze the action, right? Really crisp detail action, not really any blur. They've got the action frozen. That's going to be a much faster shutter speed. Okay, so in auto, then you have the camera looking after the aperture for you and the shutter speed to give you the result that it thinks that you want. Okay, and then also working in the background is what's called the ISO. So the ISO I refer to as how it can help you is it's helpful in low light situations. And I kind of think of it as having a flashlight for your camera, if you will. So it's a setting that just kind of perks along and does its own thing when you're in auto. But I'll cover this probably maybe in the manual setting, just so you're familiar with it if you're not already, how you can use the ISO to help with your exposure settings. And the suggestion then is, what do you maybe want, if you want to have the ISO also working in auto, and if you want it working in auto all of the time, or if you would like it working in the manual setting the majority of the time. Okay, and then I have a really dandy example for you of what happens when you're in a super low light, really poor light conditions, high ISO, what can end up with your photos. Okay, so let me see. I am going to see if I can do a screen share here for you and just show you this. Okay, so this is a viewfinder diopter here, which I've already covered for you. Okay, so if you have not yet formatted your memory card, this is possibly, and I don't want to say for sure you will see this, but this is what I would hope and expect that you would see, is that your camera will, if you're going to format, you'll be asked. So right now it's saying no. And you will want to be saying yes, or you want to say no and get the heck out of there. Okay, and so now I've clicked up here to show you this will be the yes. You would hit OK on your round, probably on your round toggle switch, and it will format the card for you. Okay, so here's an example of here's the shutter speed. Okay, and an aperture. So apertures are also referred to as f-stops. Okay, so what this is telling us here is 3.5, this being, and this is where it took me a long time to get my head wrapped around this, but I will give you a tip here that was shared with me a while ago. But start with, the smaller the number, the greater the amount of light is coming in and the more the lens diaphragm is opening, which seemed completely backwards to me. But I'll explain what that's about here shortly. Okay, and then this 500, now your camera may display shutter speed as a fraction, or it may display it like mine has here, even though I know this is a fraction. So this particular setting, this was 1/500th of a second at f3.5. Okay. So I'll just show you these slides because these will kind of lead into what I'm going to cover here shortly, and then you'd be somewhat familiar with them. Okay, so on your lens, and this is going to relate to exposure as well, but just you have information here on your lens, right? If you have a zoom, this is what's going to affect your exposure, whether you're in any setting, okay, automatic or right through to manual. And if you ever need filters, or for example, maybe you've misplaced a lens cap and you need to know what size it is, on this particular lens, it's telling me right here that this is the size 62. So you would just trot off to the good folks at McBain and you would know that you need a 62mm lens cap. Okay, so now on this, so sorry if I just go back here. Okay, so here, this is an aperture range, okay, 3.5 to 6.3. Okay, and if you look at this one, we also have the same, even though it's a different range in zoom for millimeters. Some lenses will only have one number. For example, it might be the 1 here and then 2.8. Okay, and I'll get into that for you here shortly. Okay, on some of your lenses, you might have some descriptors like this. So here you have your autofocus or manual focus. And this is the optical, on this particular lens, they call it optical stabilization, or on one of my cameras in the manual, it's called image stabilization. And this is a feature that you can use when you're hand holding your camera. Now, if you check your lens reference and or your camera, it's so far I think I've always seen it recommended when you have your camera on a tripod or a solid surface, you change it to off for optical stabilization. Otherwise, the camera can actually almost go looking for movement. And what that will do is cause even a slight little bit of blur in your photos, which you may think is a focusing problem, but it's actually not. Okay, so it's just something to be aware of, is if you have optical stabilization. And then also some camera bodies will have the feature on the body, some on the lens, and some on both. So it's just something to be aware of so that you can check the specs for your equipment. Okay, and then just when to know when to have it off or on. And same here with also the autofocus or manual focus on the camera body, right? As well as here we see it on the lens. Okay, so again, just something to be aware of if you have that situation with your equipment. And the manufacturer will give you recommendations in the manual or the information document that comes with your lens. Okay. All right, and this I'm going to cover for you later. Okay, and then we will get into white balance here. But I am just going to see if I can get back to where I was. There we go. Okay. So for those of you that have your cameras, so hopefully all of you. So if you keep in mind the number, right, that 500, that was one in my particular example there was 1/500th of a second. And the aperture at 3.5, if I remember correctly. So now if you have your cameras, just feel free to have a look, just have your cameras on, and you can do a couple of things here if you like. First of all, you can just take a photo with your camera and point it somewhere in your room or wherever you are into a well-lit area. I mean, you can even have it close to a lamp, could be, you know, on a white ceiling, a white wall. And just feel free to take a photo. And as you're looking on the back of your screen or through your viewfinder, just see if you can see two numbers that look like they could be a shutter speed and an aperture. Okay, so it could be, for example, it might be f11. It might just be the number 11 or an 8. May have the letter F in front of it, right, for the aperture or the f-stop. And then your shutter speed. So that could be a 500, might be 250, depending on how bright your room is. And it may, as I say, it may show as a fraction. Okay, so if you just take a minute and find a bright area, take a photo. Okay, and now once you have that first photo, now just aim your camera or find a space, an area where it's not as well lit. You know, it could be, I don't know if you know you have a closet in the room where you are, you could even aim in the closet, under a table or a desk, maybe somewhere where there's some shadow. And take another photo and then just see. Okay, so now there's two things you can do. Okay, the arrow is usually just a small arrow on the back of your camera that will be for playback. Because what I will anticipate is, depending on the lighting in your room, that the exposure or what the lighting looks like may be fairly constant. Okay, you're not going to see an extreme of really bright, say, and really dark. But now if you go and look at your camera settings and just maybe pop into chat if you're not able to find them. Okay, now what you're looking for is a shutter speed and an aperture for both of those photos. And kind of the goal, if you will, is that you will have seen one or both of those numbers change. Now, if they didn't change, sometimes what will throw that experiment off a little is if your ISO setting is an automatic, and it's going to go to work to compensate so that you do end up with the same exposure settings, but that's because the ISO has, I guess, is kind of helped out in the background. It's when you took the photo of the darker area, then it compensated for that area that was not as well lit. All right, so if you've had time to do that, maybe if you wouldn't mind just popping into chat if you noticed a difference with the numbers, or if you found the numbers. Okay, or if you were not able to.
I don't know.
Okay. Okay, so Lori, I heard you say you don't know. So can you give me a hint on that? Like, were you able to find any kind of numbers?
I have numbers on my screen, but I don't know how you find both of them. I'm not sure where you're meaning in the settings.
Okay,
I go
so
in my menu.
okay, so just when you look on the back of your screen,
Yeah.
what are you seeing? Just your image?
My image, and it tells me my camera, the time. It says normal, and it says 6,000 by 4,000.
Okay.
So I don't even have any IS. If I put on my computer and right click, I can tell.
Okay, so do you have on the back of your camera, do you have, it's a button that may say info, INFO?
Let me see.
Lori, do you have a viewfinder?
I do. I use my viewfinder all the time. I don't use my live view.
Okay, so if you look through your viewfinder and just have your finger on the shutter button as if you were just preparing to take your photo, right? Where if you press the shutter button halfway, right, it's like it'll give the camera time to focus. When you look in your viewfinder, I know with my camera, I look down near the bottom screen almost, if you will, of the viewfinder. Do you see some numbers down there? So it might be like an 8, maybe a 3.5, maybe a 6.3.
Okay, you meaning without looking at the picture that I took?
Yeah, so if you were just going,
I'm using a different camera. The one I normally use is a D3300, and I bought a 72, so I don't know where anything is.
that's okay. That's okay.
I'm like, I'm going blind here.
Okay. Okay, so with the camera you're using right now, Lori, you have a viewfinder, am I right?
Yep, correct.
Okay. Okay, so if you just now look through the viewfinder as if you're preparing to take a photo, as if you're going to take a photo.
Correct.
Okay, and then just press the shutter button down just halfway.
Correct.
So that you might even hear the lens start to focus.
Okay.
Okay, so when you press that button down halfway, do you now, as well as seeing what you are going to take the photo of, do you also see some numbers show up that might be, say, 500?
I do.
You do?
But can I read them? No.
Okay, so do you have an info button on the back of your camera?
I do.
Okay, so if you hit your playback, so it brings up your photo on the back of your camera.
Okay. Okay, when I push playback, it'll bring the picture up.
Right, and then
When I push, like, see is it the I button? The info button?
okay. So I don't know if you can see my camera. Can you see?
Yes,
my
it's
camera,
the I
Lori?
button.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
I button. Okay.
Okay, when
So
I
if
hit
you-
the I button, what it comes up is rating or retouch. It says rating, and then it has retouch with an arrow where I can go somewhere else. And then at the bottom, underneath that, it says select to send to smart device.
Okay.
Or I
How,
can
okay.
cancel. So maybe this, I don't know.
How about, but you said you had an info button?
Yeah, there's an I button, yeah.
Okay. Just take one quick second here.
And Lori, are you shooting in auto? Like it's just on the auto on the
Actually,
on the mode dial?
I got this one on manual.
Okay.
but it was pre-owned, so
Okay.
Sounds
So
like there's
the
a
other
weird
thing
setting.
too,
that's what I
the other
mean. Maybe
thing-
I should have set it back to the factory settings.
Yeah, can you do a like a full factory reset on that puppy?
I could, yeah.
So here's another thing too, Lori, is, okay, so if I go back into my playback here, okay, and then on this, I have a little toggle switch up here. Okay, and if I hit this, it will take me through a series of different information for my playback.
Lori,
Okay,
did you
and-
say you're shooting on a D3200?
I normally use a 33, but I bought a 7200, which is quite an upgrade from what I am. So I really don't know it.
Is that what you're using right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I didn't put it back to factory. It has, I don't know, 800 and some pictures on it.
Do you know how to do a reset on a D7200?
No, but I can look in the manual.
It is pretty easy. It is in the menu. I can
It's in the menu. Okay. Reset setup options is where I want to go.
there should be a like if you go to either the spanner, like the little wrench thing,
Yeah.
and
And it says reset setup options.
it wouldn't be setup
Oh.
options. It would,
Okay, let's go. Oh, somewhere else.
you should be able to do custom setting reset, or I mean, there's like a hard factory reset as well, but I feel like that is a little bit of overkill. You should be able to just change the custom settings. Lori, do you want me to work with this?
Yeah,
with you on,
I don't want to hold her up from everybody else.
so you and I can do like a chat if you want, and we can try and get your camera reset. If Angie, if you want to continue.
Yeah, I don't want to hold Angie up.
Okay, yeah, so depending on what we want to do there, just so you don't miss things as well, Lori, like if you like, Jolene could help you with that, or if you're comfortable and you're okay and you'd like to just continue through, we can help you with that a little closer to the end if you like.
Sure, that'll work. I don't want to hold everybody up.
Okay, but we want to make sure we help you too.
Yep.
Okay, so I was just having a quick looking chat here, and I see that some people are seeing some different numbers, some different shutter speed and aperture, so that's awesome. And some, well, except where the ISO changed, right, for Lucas, but not the aperture. So all of you then, that's great. You have had, and you will have too, Lori, your camera will have been doing some things in the background for you. Okay.
Okay.
All right, so okay, so basically kind of in a nutshell, that is what's happening for you in the automatic setting. Okay, your camera's taking care of the aperture, the shutter speed, and the ISO, and it's bringing you back some photos based on what it thinks you want. Okay, now sometimes, as I'm thinking you may have experienced already, you don't always get the results that you want. And that's where, you know, manual setting can come into play. There are also, depending on the situation as to why the camera may have done that, there are kind of some tips and tricks for dealing with those kind of things. You know, for example, I'll just give you a quick example here. Maybe you are in the house somewhere or in a building and you have people near a window, okay, and you're in the automatic setting. Everything looks great according to what you're seeing for the light, but the camera gets thrown off because you have all this light coming in from a window. Okay, so that would be an example where perhaps all of a sudden the window appears to be closer into appropriate or good exposure, but the people or maybe your pet sitting by the window, right, is underexposed or too dark. And that's what's happening there, is the camera is picking up the light from the window or a different light source, and it's not then also reacting to the complete scene with all of the people, depending on, where they might be located to the window. One thing there, I won't jump into it right now, just so I make sure I can cover these other settings with you, but just something to be aware of is your camera may very well have what's called an exposure lock button. So what you can do in auto even is, in that situation I've just described, you would say go close to your group of people, have your camera, focus on the people as you would as if you're going to take the photo. Then you would press, depending on your camera model, but I'm thinking you will press, for example, an exposure lock button. Okay, that will hold the setting there, okay, for exposure. Then you would back up and position yourself so that you can recompose or compose for your scene, and then you would take the photo. Okay, so that's one way to get around that situation if that's an issue for you. Okay, so I'm going to move on to aperture priority. Okay, and just, as we go through this, photography is definitely an adventure. And some of these things can definitely take a while to sink in. I mean, I am a perfect example of that. There were some features I knew about my camera. There were some concepts, and I got them pretty quickly. And others, it just confounded me. But, I just kept working with it and plugging away and learning more information, taking more photos. And so it's just, be inspired by what you will be able to do if you're not quite to that point already, and what you will be able to understand. And you may be out in a photo shoot with something that appears to be completely irrelevant, and you will take a photo and the light bulb will go on, and you will connect a lesson or a message or something that you read or heard, could have been months ago. And it's like all of a sudden everything will connect, and you'll go, that's what that is about. That's what that means, right? And then away you go. Okay, so now if we move into aperture priority, so depending on the type of camera you have, you may have just a mode dial. Okay, so in my particular camera, I have just a mode dial here, and it could be either the letter A, or it could be the letters AV, which means aperture value. And depending on your camera, you may not have a mode dial with it. It may be a setting within your menu. Okay, so I'm just going to give everyone a second here, a minute, to see if you can find that. If anyone is not able to find that, maybe just pop a note into chat here and we'll make sure we help you out with that. All right, is there anyone that has not found that? Okay, so Denise, am I right then? You do not have a mode dial on the top of your camera? Okay, or what kind of camera do you have? Okay, think you found it. Yeah, that's thanks for that, Jolene. It'd be a lot easier for you if you like, just you can use your mics. If you just on the bottom right of your screen, if you just hover down, you will see where there's a mute, be like a little microphone, and you can click on, I think they can do that themselves, right? Jolene, you can mute yourself or unmute yourself.
Yeah, you can just click that on or off if you want to ask a question.
Okay. And also, if you have your cameras and you're having, well, you do, and you're having trouble with it, you can always put your video on so that we can see you. And then between Jolene and I, we can maybe help you with that too. Okay, awesome. So you think you found it, Denise? That's great. All right, so how about if anyone has not found it, just quickly unmute yourself, unmute yourself and just let us know. Otherwise, we're all set to go here. Okay, all right, just jump in if I've missed anyone. Okay, so now that you're in aperture priority, so this is where you get to make the decision for your aperture setting, okay? And your camera is going to decide or choose the shutter speed for you, working within the limits that it can. So for example, if the scene and the exposure is too extreme, then your camera may have a little trouble just bringing you the correct exposure. But for the most part, when you choose the aperture setting, the shutter speed will compensate to bring you the exposure that it thinks is a good interpretation of the scene that you're looking at. Okay, so you can choose whether you want, say, an aperture, for example, depending on your lens, you might be able to go to, I think I saw like a 1.8 even here, or a 2.8. So then you may be able to go, for example, all the way up to like an f/22, f/26, even higher. Okay, so that when you are considering the aperture, there's a couple factors. One is exposure. Okay, so if you need help to bring in some extra light, right, you would go with a smaller number to open up that lens more. And if you wanted to reduce some light, then you can go to a higher number. So for example, f/22, that will close the lens down and reduce the amount of light. Okay, now you can also use aperture for creative uses, okay, for your photos. So I am going to see if I can get over here. I'm going to show you some examples.
Sorry, I'm just going to ask a question.
Sure,
So
Anne-Marie.
I have my, oh, where is it here? So my dial there, it has the AV.
Yeah.
So how do you change the aperture there? What are you turning to change?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, so so in your camera there, Anne-Marie, you will have one or two rotary dials. Okay, so on mine, I have one right here on the back.
Okay, I have one right here.
Okay, and then I also have one on the front in front of the shutter button.
Okay.
Okay, so do you have one or two?
I have one.
One?
Yeah,
Okay,
it's just behind the shutter button.
okay, so and can you see your numbers, Anne-Marie?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, they're
So
changing.
okay, so is it the aperture that's changing?
The F, yeah.
Yes, the F. Okay, perfect. So for you then, Anne-Marie, when we go to change the shutter speed, then because you just have the one dial, what I anticipate is that there will be a button for you to press and then turn that dial. It's like it will work both, one with an assist button and one without.
Okay.
Okay, great question. Thanks for stopping me there, Anne-Marie. I appreciate that.
No worries.
Okay, so for anyone else then, the key is how do you change that aperture? Okay, and so if you have, does anyone not have some kind of rotary dial like Anne-Marie and I were just going over? Okay, so just, okay, might be just like just a dial like this. Okay, so if anyone has not figured out how to change that, maybe just unmute or pop a quick no into chat.
So I have a Canon 6D. It's Lorna. Can you hear me?
Yes. Okay, Lorna.
I have a Canon 6D. I don't know. I'll put my video on, but
Okay.
if I can start it, it doesn't want to open up for me. I'm going to. Okay.
There you are.
So I don't know if you can see it, but it's on the top of my camera, just in front of my, where I pressed to take a picture. Would that be where it was?
I think so. Do you agree, Jolene?
Like right
On a
here.
6D for the aperture. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be it.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, and then when you
All right,
turn that or
thanks.
move that dial, Lorna, can you see the aperture number moving? They're changing?
If I have to look at my, I have to look at my viewfinder to do that, to see
Okay,
it change.
okay. It is changing for you?
Does it not change on the
Um,
top LCD screen?
Oh yeah, now that I look, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Okay,
Okay.
yeah, all right.
Okay, so I'm just going to see here if I can bring these up so you can see them. Okay, can you see my screen? Can you see my screen, Jolene?
No.
No? Wait, hang on. Yeah, I better go
Am I
here.
alone in that? Can everyone else see it?
No, I just see,
No.
There we go.
Yeah, there we go.
Oops. Okay. Can you see this? Can you see this now?
yeah,
A spider web?
yeah.
Yes?
Yes,
Okay.
indeed.
Okay, perfect. All right, so this is an example of using a small number aperture, okay, with the lens opening up. It's you can use it. So this is called depth of field, okay, and the one way that I finally had this figured out, or someone explained it to me a long time ago in a workshop, was he said, if you think of the smaller the number, so for your aperture, the smaller the number, the less the amount of focus, intentional focus, that you have in your photo. Okay, so this would be called a shallow depth of field because you don't even know what's behind the spider web. And I think on this photo, I'm at about a 3.5, I think, for an aperture. Okay, so I'm letting in lots of light. I'm using, that's for shallow depth of field. And just for a mood, right? Or be able to use it creatively. Okay, so this one is what's happening there, same here, right? So you can use your aperture to control that depth of field. So the amount of light with using the aperture helps you control the depth of field. And the depth of field is how much of your image or your picture is in focus from the front all the way through to the back. Okay, so here we have another shallow depth of field. So the kind of the cool thing with using aperture then this way is that when you want to, you can blur the background, and because this background in this photo and the spider web would have just been busy, too distracting, okay, and it would have taken away from the subject. Okay, so the kind of the question can always be, you know, what is my subject? Yeah, this is a little distracting to me, but here, this is just an example of a shallow depth of field. Okay, this one, as you can see, there's actually some machinery in the background here, which was a really big distraction. But again, just using a shallow depth of field. Now I was also using my a big zoom lens for this was with my 150 to 600 millimeter zoom. And so just the fact that I was so far away as well from this Northern Harrier, and I was shooting at the lowest aperture that this lens will go to with the zooming, which was at 6.3 aperture, that's going to really help me make it easy to blur the background as well. Okay, so now this will be an example of still have some shallow depth of field, but I'm not quite as shallow, even though this is blurry. There's still lots of detail here. Okay, now as I started to increase my aperture, okay, so now I've got a little more detail coming a little further around in this image, you know, back into here. So this one was, I believe, about, in this particular image, about an F8, I believe. Okay, this one was an F6.3, but I'm getting some blur here again because that was helping with the effect of my zoom lens. Okay, but this one I was at, I believe this was F11. Okay, and so I have more detail right in the trees. If I was still down at that, say 3.5 or even 6.3, but further away using my zoom, these would have become blurry. But I wanted the effect of the trees. I wanted at least to have the animals shown in their natural habitat rather than having it blurred out. Okay, and this one, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Angie, I just wanted to chime in. I know I didn't mean to interrupt you. That it is worth noting that if you're shooting with an like a crop sensor, you will have a different representation of that depth of field. That if you're shooting with a full frame versus a crop sensor, you're gonna get less
Right.
compression with the crop sensor. Yes, definitely pay attention to the aperture that Angie is saying she's shooting with, but it's not necessarily gonna be what's gonna show as far as the background bokeh in your camera if you're shooting with a crop sensor. I don't know if that made sense or not. So if you're shooting with a smaller sensor, it's just gonna show less of that background blur. So just be aware of that. So saying, well, I should have, I was shooting with an f5.6, it should have blurred the background. Not always if you're shooting with a smaller sensor.
Yeah, and that's a great reminder and a great tip there. Thank you, Jolene, because I remember as well, I had a 28 to 50 millimeter, just kind of what's referred to as a kit lens. And I can't remember what the aperture would go to, like it wasn't 2.8, it was a little higher than that. And I was wanting to blur the background. And I remember just being really frustrated. And I just, trotted over to the camera store to, I'm in Grand Prairie, but to talk to my friendly tech there. And it's like, how come I can't blur the background? And he's like, well, there will be, certain situations and with some lenses and what I was wanting to take a photo of, he said, it's just not going to happen. So it's something to be aware of, and depending on your lens and your equipment, and kind of as Jolene was saying, if you're using a crop sensor or not, but something to experiment with, think, and just see if you can, see what the limits of your camera can do for you and what you can create, and just if you have a decent zoom range, just experiment with that too, because if you zoom in, if you back up from your subject and bring your zoom in, then that can help as well. Anything else you want to add to that, Jolene?
No, and I'm sorry for interrupting it.
No, please do. Please do. It's all good.
It is just, I just didn't want anybody to be like, well, they said I should be able to shoot at this aperture.
Right.
So just be aware of what you're shooting with, and it does change the result, but I absolutely agree. Get out and shoot and see what you can do before you decide, it's not even worth it to try.
Right. Yeah, and I appreciate that, because you're right. And that, and that's what took me back to, the local camera store where I live, is like, okay, well, I understood that if I went to my, lowest aperture, that I should be able to blur the background no matter what. Right. And as Jolene has said, and it doesn't always work that way and go according to plan because of equipment or your subject limitations. And yes, it can be frustrating. So this one, I was back up to a more of a mid-range aperture, like around f11. So a couple things here while we're on this one is I've sort of, I guess you could say, used framing here a little bit. There's a bit too much space here, but what I mean by that is if I didn't have this distraction as much on the left side, and the eye would be forced to come in between these two trees, okay, and then the human element. Now it is kind of smack in the middle of the photo too, So that's always open for one's own interpretation. Okay, remember, you're taking photos for yourself. So whatever you like. Okay, and this was using a higher aperture setting. Okay, and then a couple of things here, right? I have the foreground here in focus, and then also you could treat this a bit like a leading line, right? For composition, it kind of jams up here, but the idea of a leading line is to just compose your photo so it takes the viewer, somewhere all the way back through your image. Now, if this was more of an open space, that would have worked more appropriately, but it's just a bit of a hint for a leading line. Okay, now this one, I kind of messed up a bit on this one because of the focus point and where I was, but I was, I think, about F22 actually for this image. And you can see I do have some clear detail through here and all the way to the back. It's just that this caught me a bit off guard with just my focus and where I was focusing and how close I was to these flowers. So, I've sort of led you a little bit astray here because it did not work out, but this gives you an example where, you can see it maybe then changing the focus point, moving back a little bit more, and just taking a moment just to check that I had what I wanted in focus was in focus. Okay, so aperture you can use for your exposure as well, right? Because that's the amount of light. So I threw this image up here because, you might be out somewhere and you have this beautiful sunset or sunrise or stormy clouds. And if you just play, now that I'm going to say this, it also kind of depends on if your shutter speed is going to compensate too much of your ISO and mess you up. But in manual, for sure, this can work, is that you can change the aperture to increase or decrease the amount of light. Okay, so if your shutter speed is not overcompensating and not allowing you to, like with just changing the aperture, right? I could lighten this image a little or darken it for a bit more of a, a more ominous almost mood. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to see here. Oh, get me back. Okay. Okay, so in a nutshell, we have the camera in auto that's looking after the shutter speed for you, the aperture for you, and the ISO. Okay, and then in aperture priority, which you've switched your cameras to, you adjust the aperture, and that is going to allow you to, as Jolene said, all going as planned, and depending on your equipment, hopefully you will all have the opportunity that you can experiment and create some kind of artistic blur if you want in the background. Or I think of aperture kind of the higher the number, right? You've kind of got the postcard look where everything is in focus from front to back. Okay, and then if your equipment will allow you, when you go to the smaller number, which is the less the amount of focus in your image, you can use aperture to help you create some artistic effects and to bring in more light or less light. Okay, and so a lot of this really is just going to be playing around with your cameras, just taking different photos in different places, see what you get for results, but also just by being aware of some of these features and aspects, then your camera manual will also start to make more sense, okay, because sometimes it can be a little confusing. Okay, so the partner to aperture, so I've kind of briefly discussed, is shutter speed. And shutter speed then is, with aperture being the amount of light, shutter speed is how long are you letting that light in for? So for example, does it seem like when you take a photo, your camera, it's like you hear that click and it's really fast? Or does it seem sometimes like it takes quite a while for your camera to actually take that photo? Right, where you might be into perhaps 1/30th of a second versus say 1/1000th of a second. And if you see two little marks come up, like for those of us that still like to work in inches, it's like the little quotation for inches, that means you're getting into seconds. And at least correct me if I'm wrong, Jolene, but I think probably all cameras, if not most, will, once you get into seconds, will show, it's almost like the little quotation.
I'm pretty sure most of them will. But like you said, they won't all show the fraction, but they should at that stage start showing a quotation or
Right,
little
so
apostrophes.
Yeah, right. So I think probably if you consider, if you're not seeing those little apostrophes, you'll be seeing a fraction of time, right? Could be 1/125th of a second, for example, 1/500th of a second, 1/1000, 1/4000. And again, you know, you could take some time and just go through the shutter speed settings with your camera and just see what is your top range. So how fast can your shutter speed go? You know, are you at 4,000, 1/8000th of a second? And how slow can you go? Okay, so some maybe kind of depends again on your camera. Mine will allow me to adjust the shutter speed. And so, and again, sorry, let me back up here. So to go to shutter speed, you will, if you have the mode dial, now you would be on the letter S or the letter TV. And if you use the mode dial to change to go to your aperture setting in the previous exercise, then now you would switch to the letter S or TV. Anything else, Jolene, you think that might be on a mode dial for that?
TV or maybe TP. I can't remember if they do priority, but yeah, I think that covers it.
Okay. Okay, and so if you have two dials on your camera, one will change the aperture and one will change the shutter speed. Okay. So like on my camera here, I have the one dial at the back and I have the one dial at the front. Okay, one changes shutter speed, one changes aperture. And for, was it Anne Marie? I think, where yours will, am I correct there, Anne Marie, that?
Yeah, I
Oh,
have
the
one.
Fuji. Okay, you will have a button to press. Okay, all right. So as a Fuji user, none of these exist. They use weird terminology.
Well, which Fuji are you using though, Quint? Because if it's the Fuji should have most of them like on the, yeah, the T4 is, the X-T4 is going to have it all on the outside. So you're going to be looking at a dial instead of changing the mode. So are you able to keep up with this though? Like, it should be, because if you know which one is your shutter speed, because your lens should also have an aperture ring on it as well. Yeah, just good.
Okay,
All right,
good.
just being a little, just being a little keener about it. Good.
Awesome. I know we're throwing a lot of ideas at you here. So it's like I say, it's just to become aware and become familiar and just, you know, hopefully not to become overwhelmed, but just to know that you have these features, your camera has these features, and just to give you some ideas as to how you can use them, all going well. Okay, so shutter speed then is you controlling how fast or how long you want the light to enter in through your lens. So for example, you can control the shutter speed for that blurry waterfall look. Okay, I'll show you some examples of shutter speed here in just a second. And then capturing, you know, those fast moving subjects. Okay, so I'll go back over. Let me see. I think I have to share again here. All right, do you see a cloud photo?
We see the folder with the cloud in it. If you bring up the, like, double click that, it should fill the screen, I think.
Okay, so you're not seeing a screen with it yet?
No, I just see the folder.
Oh, there we go. Okay, you're here. Okay, that now you see it?
No.
No?
I still just see the folder.
Okay. Do you see me move this?
Your mouse moved. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I can
And
see
then-
the
And
cursor
now you
moving.
see, and now do you see it on an image now?
Yeah.
Okay, so if now do you see it?
We got to click it. No, we're back to you.
Yeah, it was just showing the folder, not the actual image.
Okay.
Ah, don't you love technology? There we go.
Okay. There, oh, now you see it?
Oh yeah.
Okay, I have no idea what I did there, but okay. All right, so now you're seeing a cloud photo, storm cloud, right?
Correct.
Okay. All right, so. Okay, so this one, I guess, doesn't really relate to shutter speed. I was thinking, why did I put this one in here? But this one is just an example, a bit of, well, I guess in a way it is with shutter speed, because you could still use your aperture or your shutter speed if you wanted to increase or decrease light, okay, with the aperture or the length of time that you were letting that light in. But when we look at this image, part of it is because it's sunset, okay, and so we have some light coming in here, right? So this just kind of gets into becoming observant of light and how it can really make a difference to your images. Okay, so here's an example of a slow shutter speed. This one, I believe, was 1/30th of a second. Okay, and it's a little different, it seems, with digital, because when I took this photo, this was way back like 20 years ago when I was beginning to take workshops, and I learned with a film camera, and I mean, you still could do this. I would print 4x6 prints, and I would put sticky labels on them and throw them in my camera bag. Okay, so I would, for example, print this one, and I would write down on a sticky label what my aperture was and what my shutter speed was. And I would take photos of extremes. Okay, so for example, if this was 1/30th of a second shutter speed, then I would also have an example that might be 1/500th of a second or 1/1000th of a second. And instead of seeing this blur, you'd see all kinds of splash and details in the drops. Okay, so here's another example of slow shutter speed. Okay, so you're letting the light in longer. It's taking longer to take the photo. And so the subject is just moving through at a slower seeming pace, okay, to blur that. Now for this one, okay, this one is a little faster shutter speed than the first two. And we can realize that because we've got a little bit more detail going on here and here, a little bit more splash. Okay, so that's kind of where you can ask yourself, okay, what is my subject and how do I want to photograph it? So looking at this, it would be now, do I want to see spray and details in the bubbles and the water and everything, or do you want just kind of that blurry, dreamy look? Okay, and you can use then your shutter speed to create those effects. Okay, the faster the shutter speed, the more you're going to see detail and capture, or as they say, freeze the action. Okay, so this shutter speed, my focus is off a little bit, but here we can see the shutter speed is kind of fast enough because I do have a bit of detail in here, but I still, because I have some blur here, right, then it wasn't fast enough to capture that kind of motion quickly enough. Okay, my shutter speed needed to be a little faster if I'd anticipated this happening, I guess, or thought about the fact that the birds would be flying in. Okay, but that's kind of what that's telling me. If I was looking at that on the back of my camera, my LCD screen, I would say, oh, if I want to capture that again or find another bird like this, I'm going to crank up my shutter speed a little faster so that I don't have as much blur, right? Unless you want to go for a bit of creativity. Okay, now this one almost makes my eyes hurt. And the reason I'm showing you this one is this is an extreme example of a shutter speed way too slow. Okay, and when I went back and looked, this is at 1/30th of a second. Okay, where ideally, now and I'm really not sure why this is, it might be one of the first photos I took, so it was a test one, but I really don't know why I was at 1/30th of a second less. I mean, I do know that the light was horrible in this building, and there's dark brown sand or soil, so it just sucked up the light, and it was with it was with a camera I had about probably 16, 17 years ago. So the ISO handling and the low light was not as efficient as it is these days. But for this one, ideally, I probably would have wanted to be at least about 1/1000th of a second, if not faster. Like ideally, probably I would have been at 1/2000th of a second. Okay, so far too slow. This one, because we're seeing lots of detail, capturing all of this, this is a fast shutter speed. Okay, and this one, I think I was at 1/1600th of a second. And same here, fast shutter speed, because I want to make sure that I'm capturing the action, and I've got enough light as well, which is, of course, always helpful. Although I really like bright cloud for situations like this, because then it's nice, even lighting. Now I threw these in just because also with shutter speed and thinking of action photography is learning to anticipate. Okay, this was at the Arctic Winter Games. We had like probably 12 years ago now or more. It was in 2010, way more. So I had the opportunity for 10 days of photographing sports photos, which I'd never done before. And one of the things I learned is that press the shutter button a split second before my brain really told me that I wanted to, because I realized that if I waited until I saw the action happening, it was too late. Okay, like the puck was gone, the action was over. So this one, I mean, I managed to catch a little, but still in the beginning, I would have missed this. The puck would not have been there. And sometimes that's the thing with action photography or sports, or whether it's birds or, your pets running or children or any fast moving subject, anticipation can really come into play. And I still find it's almost like pressing that shutter button a split second before you think you want to, so that you actually capture the action, certain amount of anticipation and being ready so that you don't miss what you want. Now, that being said, there's a debate between having your camera set to what's called the burst setting, which really you just hold the shutter button down and the camera will just take a number of photos depending on the capacity of your camera and how many it can take per second. Then on the flip side, there's also the debate of you wait and you anticipate and you take the one shot that you think you want. I've kind of experiment, or kind of depending on the subject, I will do both. I tend to usually go with one shot. But again, that it's a personal preference and depending on the subject. Okay, this one is an example of just press. This is the shot that I wanted. Now, if I'd been on burst setting, right, I would have also had her kicking the ball. But at this particular time, I was just on a single shoot, and it was just one shot at a time for focus. And this was just the anticipation, right? I saw her running up to this, and it was just getting ready for when I thought she was going to launch. Same here. This was just in a situation where I knew these geese were down in the bulrushes and making lots of noise, and it was in the springtime. There was lots of commotion going on, and it was just a case of waiting. And I saw the head just up over the bulrushes, and I just quietly waited and waited until eventually they just started making a lot of noise and took off, and just managed to capture them. Now with shutter speed and capturing action, you look at these are almost coming across as sideways. Okay, where these two trumpeter swans are coming more just straight over my head. It can be easier to capture action coming towards you or going away from you versus going side to side. Okay, so if you're out in a photo shoot somewhere and there's lots of action and speed going on and you're having a little trouble, just see if you can get yourself so that the action is coming towards you or going away from you. And it's just easier to capture subjects that way. It's not that you definitely can't the other way, you certainly can, but in the beginning, it can just be a good way to practice. Same here, just anticipation. I know it was just a case of being really patient and just watching the behavior and waiting. Finger on the shutter button, and again, just a fast shutter speed so that I could freeze the action and not have this too blurry. I didn't really want it blurry at all. And same with this one. It left this perch and circled around. I was in my vehicle, but I saw it circling. It's like, it's going to come back here. And so I was just ready. I kind of had one eye on it a little bit and one right here. I was focused on here, just waiting for it to come in. And, you know, we have some little bit of beginning sunset light, not a lot, but just a little bit of light here. And that was just anticipation, waiting, and just being ready. Okay, so those are kind of some things that you can do with shutter speed. Okay, so how are we for time here? Okay, so before we move on to manual, I know we've covered a lot of things so far. Does anyone have any questions, pressing questions, anything you're just not feeling comfortable about that you would really like answered at this point? Or are you feeling okay that you can go and experiment with your aperture priority, your shutter speed, and even in auto? Okay, so if anyone is not doing okay, please feel free just to let us know.
Lorna wants us to talk about ISO.
ISO, okay. All right, so Lorna, are you okay if we will bring that into manual? All right, so, all right, thank you, Lorna. Okay, so manual setting is, okay, so that's where you get to choose the aperture and the shutter speed. Okay, so your camera will, for those of you that have the mode dial, okay, that we've already found the aperture setting and shutter speed now, it's possible that well, I'm thinking it will be the letter M. What are you thinking there, Jolene? Anything else?
Oh no, I'm pretty sure everyone is using manual or M for manual. So,
Okay.
and again, yeah, you're right, Quint, the Fuji, unless you have the shutter speed and ISO set to automatic, Fuji is always in manual. So,
Ah, interesting.
yeah, they're sneaky that way.
That they are. Okay, so this is always kind of a fun experiment I like to do when I'm teaching classes is you could take two photos for this, and we'll do the same thing as aperture. So without changing anything in your camera, tricky weirdos, right? Without changing anything in your camera, if you will please just take one photo again in a brightly lit area, and then take another one in an area that is not so bright. Okay, and then we'll just give you a minute for that, and then we're just going to get some reactions.
I feel like I'm cheating. I know the answers.
That's awesome. I love it.
So taking the picture in manual of the darker space, it's like the camera was fighting me. It didn't want me to press the button.
Oh, okay.
So it wouldn't
so,
let you focus.
Yeah, maybe it was too
right. So,
dark.
yeah, so there's two things you could do there, Anne-Marie. That's a great comment. One is you could go to a slightly brighter area, but now sometimes too, the camera, you'll have trouble focusing the camera in the automatic focus mode. And so sometimes, so what you can do, sometimes even just you might be too close to a subject, even just backing up a step or two will help. And sometimes also then just switching to manual focus and then using, if you have the focusing ring on your lens, than just manually focusing.
Oh,
But to
okay.
keep that easy for tonight, if you like, Anne Marie, just if it's having trouble, just choose an area that's slightly, that's still darker than the one that you took the first time.
Okay.
Great point there. Thanks, Anne Marie. Yeah, like I've had times where, you know, my camera's just for whatever reason is just having an issue with the autofocus, you know, and just because I don't think it needs to be having an issue doesn't mean it's not, because of how it's interpreting the scene. And so then I will flip to manual focus. And if it's still having an issue, then in my situation, I find usually it's because I'm too close to my subject and I need to just back up just a little bit and, you know, just back up in steps, you know, little increments, and just see where it does work. All right, so if everyone has had time to take a couple photos, if you wouldn't mind, so you could either just unmute or pop into chat what happened for you, what you ended up with for images. You know, did you have some that were too dark, some that one that was light, one that was dark? Did you like the exposure or the lighting, or you didn't, you know, yes or no?
Everyone's shy. That's okay. I found the one that I mean, my camera was in weird settings. When I took it in the dark spot, it was massively underexposed, just a black nothing.
Awesome.
So
All right. So when I teach classes, I love this exercise because you just never know what you're going to get. And so if your photos were like Jolene's, and sometimes, you know, the thought can be, oh my gosh, you know, like what happened here, and this isn't right, and that's not right, and what do I do? But I think it's, you know, there can be so much that you can learn. Well, okay, based on my experience, I feel that can be helpful to you with what did not work. You can learn as much, if not more, sometimes from what did not work according to plan as to what did work. Okay, so sometimes, you know, like I'll look at my photos and think, okay, now this didn't work because of, okay, it's like, okay, I can take that and learn from that. So in this situation, okay, so with Jolene's example here, if you found that you had a photo that looked fairly decent and you were happy with the exposure, and then one in the darker setting was just, you know, you're losing detail, it's hard to make anything out, it's way too dark. Now what do you do? Okay, so now what you do is you think about, you know, what is my subject and how do I want to portray it? But then if we just keep it simple, it's like, let's get the exposure. Okay, so if your image is too dark, then there's two things that you can do. You can either, depending on where your aperture is, so let's say, for example, your aperture is maybe at f8. Okay, you could dial your aperture down to, if your camera will go this low, say to f4 maybe. Lower if it will let you go lower, because now you're going to bring in some more light. And if it was really dark, you could do two things. You can open up your aperture. You can also slow down your shutter speed, okay, because that will bring in more light. And this is where we could address ISO. Okay, so let's say then you think, well, okay, I really don't want to change my aperture that much. And I really don't want to change my shutter speed that much because I want to capture this moving subject, or I just want to leave things close to how they are. What else can I do? And you don't want to use flash. Okay, so then you can use your ISO setting. Okay, and I would think of the ISO as like a flashlight for your camera. So it's almost like it's not really that it tricks your camera, but when you adjust your ISO, it's like telling your camera, your scene, their subject that you're looking at is brighter than the camera thought it was before you adjusted the ISO. Okay, so if you are in auto ISO, your camera is going to be adjusting the ISO for you. But let's see if everyone can find their ISO setting and see if you can tell whether it's in auto or if it's set on a specific number. Okay, so I will just, I can bring mine up here for you. Okay, so for example, oh, maybe you can't see this too well. Okay, I have an ISO setting with some numbers. Okay, so for example, mine has like, I think like 100. If you're looking for numbers, for example, like 100, maybe 200, depending on the camera, you might have increments between the hundreds, or it might go 100, 200, 400, 600, up to say 64,000. You might hit a high ISO. And so if you take one of the, okay, so if you find your ISO setting and change that setting, so if it's not at a high number, let's say if it's below even say 1600 or 3200, if it's anywhere even around there, just crank it up. Just turn it up so that you're up to say even 6400, for example, in your ISO. And then take another photo. It could be either one, the first one or the second one that you took in manual. Okay, so if anyone is not able to find their ISO setting, if you just unmute or just pop into chat just to know, okay, we'll help you sort that out. And then if you found it, if you have it off auto, if it's not on, if it's in auto, change it so it's out of auto and choose a high number. And you can go as high as you want, really. You could go 6,400, 8,000, 10,000. Just if you like, just go extremes. I think when I was learning, I like to go in extremes, so then I could really get a sense of what was going on. Okay, so I'll just give you a minute to do that. And then if you're having trouble, then please feel free to let us know in the chat or just unmute. Okay, and then the goal here is then once you've adjusted your ISO setting, if you will take another photo that's in the same location of one of the two that you took just in manual, and then just let us know what the results are, what you noticed.
With the higher ISO, it was much sharper and brighter.
Ah, good job, Anne Marie.
Okay, good.
Hey, right on. Okay, and so the one experiment that I actually did with the first digital camera that I had was because the digital ISO was was sort of new, I guess. Cameras these days handle ISO, I think, so much better. But with my very first digital camera, the higher I went with my ISO, the more what's called digital noise or grainy looking photos I would get. And I have a good example of that for you coming up. So one of the experiments I suggest is, you could always just cycle through, just go through some of your different ISO settings. You can even, just choose the same subject somewhere, sometime like inside or outside, or in probably better in a lower lit area, and go through your ISO settings and find what's your comfort threshold. Okay, so by that, I mean, are you happy with what your camera is able to deliver at, let's say, 3200 ISO or 6400 ISO? Because, for example, I was photographing my son. He was doing some horse things in an arena. The light was atrocious and the soil is super dark. And so I know that I am not going to be able to get what I want for an image, because I wanted to keep my shutter speed at a certain speed so that he wasn't blurry because the speed was too slow. The aperture on my lens was as wide open as I could get. So in that situation, I know that I will be sacrificing a little bit, well, in this case, it was a bit of digital noise. So that I could at least get just some collection memory photos for him, even though I knew I was not going to be able to get the quality that I wanted in that particular situation. Okay, so it's always, it can be just a good idea to run through that ISO and know what your comfort level is, because once you know that, and with your camera setting, then you'll be able to think about, okay, well, if I stop at, let's say 6400 ISO, well, maybe now I'll dial my aperture down a little bit if I can. I'll, open up the lens, or I'll slow my shutter speed just a little bit if I can just kind of make everything work together. Okay, so let me see, was that Lorna? I think that was you with the question about the ISO. I hope I'm right there.
Yeah, I'm just trying to figure out how to lock my ISO into my my camera, because I changed a couple of my ISOs rates, but it always come back up when I looked at after the picture was taken that the ISO was still on auto.
Okay,
So
did
do I
you
have
press,
to lock it?
yeah, like did you press an OK button? Or yeah, go ahead, Jolene.
What camera are you shooting with again? Is that the 6D or was that not you?
Yeah, the 6D EOS Canon.
Yeah. That one, that is weird. So when you're in manual, your camera has a little ISO button, right? On the
Yeah,
top next to one of the dials.
yeah.
So when you press that and hold it and move one of the dials, does it change your ISO on the top LCD screen?
No, nothing comes up on the top screen. I've got on the menu bar, it's got an ISO thing. I can select my ISO speed range.
Yeah.
But it doesn't transfer when I'm taking the picture.
And
So
do you have a custom setting saved at all? Not to your knowledge, or?
No, I just got the camera yesterday.
And was it brand spanking new or is it used?
Yeah. Oh, brand new.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to get a gauge of what might be doing that. Because it should be able to change, like you're on the M on the mode dial.
Uh-huh.
And you hold the ISO button and move one of your the wheels, and it doesn't do anything.
Yeah, I don't see any numbers coming up.
And that's on the top LCD and the back LCD?
Yeah, like I don't see anything on my top viewfinder where I type of stuff. So
Okay, so you're not seeing you're not seeing the numbers change then, Lorna?
I'm not seeing anything change. There's
Like
no
this-
numbers there at all.
Oh, on the top LCD, is your camera turned on?
Yeah,
Okay.
because
Well,
my menu's open. Like I've got on the little screen on the side, I've got the menu, and it says ISO speed settings, and then it has ISO speed auto, and then ISO speed range.
Okay,
And then
so
it's got auto range.
so get out of the menu entirely and just go like you're going to be taking a photo.
Okay.
Now hold that ISO button on the top of your camera.
Okay.
Hold that and spin one of the wheels. And look at the little screen on the very top of the camera, not the big LCD on the back, but the small screen, because you have a 6D, so it should have an LCD display on the top.
Yeah. Okay.
And is that changing?
Now I got it. Yeah, now it is.
Okay.
Okay.
So you should be able, and that should show, like if you have your details displayed on the back LCD screen, it should show there as well. But that depends on what type of display setup you've got going right now.
Yeah.
But you
I had a similar camera. Yeah, I had a similar camera about 5 years ago, but it was stolen.
Yeah.
And I liked using it because I was taking pictures of my daughter's gymnastic competitions.
Oh, cool.
And so we couldn't use flash, so I had to adjust my ISO to take the pictures of them off the trampolines because they were doing tramp routines. So
Wow.
that's where I was experimenting with my ISOs. So I was just trying to figure out how to get it back on my camera because it's been a while since I've worked with it. So, but I got some really good shots.
Awesome. Good for you, Lorna. That's great. So,
Yeah.
so did that work for you now, Lorna?
Yeah.
You're at a set number?
Yeah. So I'm able to go up to over 6,000. So.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Thanks, Jolene.
Anytime.
Yeah, so as I say, just it can be worth just going through that exercise to see where digital noise starts to come in, kind of some grainy looking photos, look a little pixelated. Sometimes mine will even look green, just so that you know, right? And then you can make the decision on how you want to deal with that. Okay, so one more thing I'd like to make sure we cover here too is white balance. But before we get into just a brief overview of white balance and how it can work for or against you, does anyone have any questions about shooting in manual mode? Or do you feel comfortable enough that you could put your camera in manual and rather than concerning yourself even so much as how your photos turn out, but that you would just be comfortable changing your aperture setting, changing your shutter speed, and just playing around in and your ISO if you want to, and playing around in the manual mode. Okay, is everyone okay with that, just from an awareness and what we've covered so far before we move on? Just let us know if you're not, okay? Like I say, we're throwing a lot of ideas at you here.
So I just have one question, because I have that one wheel. Where is the button to, I know that if I'm in AV, the button works on AV, the TV, it works on the TV, but when I'm in manual and I want to change two things, there's a button I need to push that lets me do one then the other?
You're on a Canon, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there should be a button on the back that'll have like a plus minus sign and AV on it somewhere.
Oh yeah, okay.
And you hold that and spin the wheel and that'll adjust your aperture when you're in full manual.
Okay.
And
then if I want to change the shutter speed in manual, what would happen?
So you should be able to change the shutter speed without holding any alternative buttons and just spin the wheel. And
Okay.
you should be able to change the aperture by holding that AV or plus minus button and spinning the wheel.
Perfect. Thank you.
No worries.
Awesome. We have got some photographers here, Jolene, I tell you, they are on the way.
Heck yeah. Everyone's well on their way to be in
Boy,
the next.
are they ever.
Yeah. No.
Yes.
Well, I mean, this is the starting point, like learning your equipment and knowing how to use it. Like, we just released a staff profile where one of our staff was talking about, like, worry about all the equipment except for the camera and worry about knowing how to use what you have. And as like a stepping off point to becoming a photographer. And I really appreciated that because it's not, well, yes, it is about the gear. Some gear can't do certain things. And that's just kind of like a limitation of technology as it gets better. But like, if you know how to work a camera, you can do some spectacular things with some very old or, what we might consider outdated gear. You can still take some beautiful photos. People have been taking beautiful photos for decades, for even longer than that. So don't let your, what you have limit you. Just get out and shoot.
Have fun and get out and shoot and just, it'll be an adventure.
Well, part of my
sorry, go ahead, Anne-Marie.
Part of why I'm taking this course is because in 3 weeks I'm going on an adventure to Egypt and I'm going to take pictures of pyramids.
Oh, good for you, Anne-Marie.
Holy cow.
Oh, are you in Edmonton, Anne-Marie?
Yes.
Oh, Jolene, you probably want to know how that goes, right?
You get some sunshine, girl. Oh my gosh.
Yes. Oh, that's fabulous, Anne Marie.
Hmm.
Okay, so so there's two more things I'd like to touch on quickly here for you, and then I will give you one final slideshow just for some tips on composition and lighting, and then we'll just wrap up with any questions for you. If everyone's okay, just hanging in here for a few more minutes. I wanted to bring up white balance because I don't know if any of you have experienced where if you've, well, and maybe with the gymnastics, right? Or going into a school gymnasium or certain buildings, or even being in your home versus outside. And gymnasiums, I find, tend to be notorious for, you know, you can be outside taking photos, everything looks fine. You go inside, you're in the gymnasium or different lighting situations, take some photos, and your photos just, sometimes they'll look yellow. They just take on this really odd color. And it's like, what the heck is going on here? Well, this is white balance at work. Okay, so white balance is, if you think of like it's a temperature, right? The temperature of light. And so different kind of light, whether it's sunlight or introduced light or anything, will have different hues to it or temperatures to it. And they can really mess with the quality of your photos. So I am thinking that probably all of you, I'm not going to assume because I could be wrong, but I'm thinking that you will be on auto white balance. So I'm just going to take a moment here and see if you can locate your white balance setting. And it will show you a screen. I'll just bring it up here on my camera. And it will show you a screen that will say things probably like fluorescent, incandescent, cloud, sun, shade. That's kind of what you're looking for. Okay, and once you
Custom white balance. Is that the
yeah,
one?
so we want to get you off, correct me if I'm wrong, Jolene, but off the custom white balance and just choose, let me see, choose maybe something like a tungsten.
Yeah, custom white balance is where you're going to set your own white to the camera. So it'll, that's a little more complicated
Okay.
and more for like studio settings.
Yeah, so just see if anyone, like if you can find a tungsten, that's usually a really fun one to experiment with. But okay, so just has everyone, I guess, has anyone not been able to find your white balance setting?
I don't, other than that statement that says custom white balance, I don't have anything that makes sense.
Does your
I
camera
think-
have a WB button somewhere on the back?
Yeah.
So when you back out of the menu and just hit that WB button.
Okay. That was easy.
Yeah, most of it,
Good.
you don't actually even have to go into the menu. A lot of the cameras are so intuitively designed that you have those buttons that they know are common use on the back. So you may not even have to touch the menu for a lot of these.
Okay.
All right, so the goal of this one is if everyone can has found their white balance setting, and like I say, tungsten is usually a fun one because it tends to be kind of extreme. You can point to a fairly well lit area and then just take a photo. And if you would like to, then after you take one, for example, in tungsten, then you could switch to incandescent or even cloud or shade and take another photo and then see what happens. Okay, so Anne Marie, like depending on where you go in Egypt, if you're in buildings and they allow you to take photos in there,
Mhm.
and if you come up with the issue where your photos look great for exposure outside, but now you go inside, and they don't look, the color that you would like, then I would suggest, start playing around with your white balance. And sometimes it takes just a bit of scrolling through the different white balance settings to see which one you like the best.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
A lot of cameras will also have a tendency toward being warmer or cooler. So knowing your camera will also help determine which white balance setting is often best. I find Canon tends toward warm, Nikon's a little bit cooler. So it just depends what you're shooting with to know where you kind of land on that, like you said, the temperature scale of your light.
Was I, or Lorna, was it you going to Egypt?
No, it's
Or
Anne
no,
Marie.
that's you. Anne Marie, are you going to
Anne-Marie.
Egypt?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and then Jeline, to add to that too, like my Nikon has, which I discovered after a little while, in my white balance setting, I can set it to, like, I think it has a white balance, I think it's 1 or 2, but I can set one to be slightly warmer than the other if I have a preference. So one will be slightly cooler, auto white balance, and the other setting will, if depending on which one I choose, will be slightly warmer. All right, so is there anyone that did not find the white balance setting and was not able to see a difference in a photo? If you would just unmute or let us know in chat, that'd be awesome, so we know that you're okay with that. All
I
right.
couldn't find my white balance. It's Lorna.
Oh, you could not, Lorna?
No. Where would it
Okay.
be on my camera?
You have what? Sorry.
Where would it be on the Canon?
And do you have a WB button on the back of your camera?
I don't see one.
Okay. And I'm so
There's
sorry.
There's a little star and then there's a little sort of plus thing that goes arrows left and right. I think that's my aperture.
Yeah, I'm just trying to remember. Can you remind me what your model was again?
The 60, the EOS 6D Mark II.
Oh, it's the Mark II. Okay, yeah. So I'm just trying to remember. Yeah, this one you may have to do the menu. So
And in menu, I think you may go into shooting menu.
yeah, it's gonna be the first one. It'll be when you're in manual, it should be the third of the red camera. And then there should be white balance as like the fourth item down on the menu.
I'm just trying to find the red ones. I only get one coming up on the red.
So you're in manual, you hit menu,
Uh-huh.
and you're in one of the red shooting menus, like not the red, like the little camera icon.
Okay, just a second. I have to be in manual.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, now it comes up. So under the camera.
Under one of the
Okay.
camera, it should be
Okay.
the third one.
So I've got white balance. It says AWB.
Yeah, that's auto white balance.
And then
And then you get there's a little sun, and that's
how do I get back to the menu?
you should be able to, there should be either
Okay.
an
Yeah,
exit
then it's
back
got-
or menu.
Yeah, so we've got white balance, then custom white balance, and then white balance shift.
So you don't
So-
need any of those, just when you hover over the white balance, hit OK or the center button.
And set.
And then it should allow you to either like to move left or right across.
Okay. Yeah, so it's got daylight, shade, cloudy, tungsten.
Ah, yeah, there
Okay.
you are.
Yeah, those are the ones.
Okay. So what do you want me to do now that I found it?
Just choose one. Just choose
Okay.
anyone, like probably like a tungsten is a good one. And then also I need to remind everyone, once you've done this experiment, just change it back. right? Just if you were in auto white balance, just remember to go back there after. Otherwise, you won't be happy with me when you go to take photos next time. But this is just so you can see how the white balance can affect what your photos look like, depending on the light situation or the temperature of the light that you're in. Did you make out okay there, Lorna?
I'm not getting a picture coming up.
Does it look over like really dark?
Oh, just got a black screen.
Okay, maybe it might just be where you took the photo, because it should still stay there, right, Jolene? If she just even goes back to the automatic setting, right, just gets out of manual and goes back to auto, that white balance should still stay there, right?
Generally, yeah, it would keep the balance, the white balance.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
just
so you
not getting the picture coming up at all.
Can you
Like, I'm
just, have you tried just like pressing the shutter, and because it may just be that it's stuck in a menu somewhere.
Okay, I'll go back to.
Is the lens cap
Go
on?
back into. No, the lens cap is off. I can see through my viewfinder. I can see my picture. And they take a picture, but nothing comes up that I can see my picture, what I took. It's all black.
Oh, that's weird.
So, okay, even after hitting the playback button?
Yeah. Could it be because I don't have a card in the camera? Would that?
That might have
Might.
something to do with it, yeah.
Okay.
Usually Canons can't play anything back if they don't have a memory card.
Okay. I've got cards. I just didn't have one put in before we started the course. So,
Okay.
and it's upstairs. I'm not going to run up and get it. So just
Okay.
continue on.
Yeah, that could be, I think. Hey, Jolene. I have a quick tip for you, thinking of memory cards. If you are limited to your memory cards, one thing that I do is when I take my memory card out of my camera, and even if I leave my camera in my camera bag, I turn my camera on its side. And the reason I do that is a number of years ago, I think I just had one memory card. I since have more. I took my card out of the camera, threw it in my computer, was the downloaded photos, and then I guess I forgot about it. And I went off, and I had this morning, it was absolute glorious sunrise. And there were these geese in this ditch. It was in the spring, and they're spraying water, and just, it was just spectacular. And so I am clicking away, and I can see things coming up on my LCD screen on the back. And, I took some more photos, and then I noticed, well, I couldn't see the photos. And to make a short story out of it, I did not have a card in the camera. I had left it in my computer. And when I went to the camera, our local camera store here, the tech said, well, it's, I could see it. He said, I probably could have retrieved the photos if I had not looked at them in playback. They would have gone into the camera memory. So ever since then, because that was really quite heartbreaking, but ever since then, it's just a reminder to myself, when my camera is on its side, that means I have a card in my computer, or I need to put a replacement card into my camera. And I've also started shooting, if you have 2 memory card slots. I had a memory card corrupt for some strange reason. I don't know why. And I still have the card, and I haven't done anything with it in case one day it will read photos. But I waited 40 years to get pictures of caribou, and they're on that formatted card corrupted card. I can't get them off. But a friend of mine said, hang on to it, because he switched external hard drives, and it was literally 4 years later he was able to have it read one of his cards where he ran into that issue. So I use one as a backup card, or JPEG. I tend to shoot in RAW, and then one in JPEG. And so I use 2 cards because my camera allows me to, and flip my camera on the side when I know that I need to make sure I leave home with cards. Okay, so is everyone okay for time here? So if I just quickly wrap up a few more things, and Jeline, are you okay? Like maybe another 10 minutes here or so, if we can just quickly wrap this up for everyone and not hold people up.
Yeah, I figure, you know, get through what we had planned for tonight. And like I said, it's being recorded. So if y'all can't stay, you can get the recording after.
Oh, okay, awesome. So it's just a couple things I'm going to quickly cover for you, and then I'll end with a quick slideshow just for some more tips and some composition and lighting ideas for you. So one is quickly about your lens. Okay, so you have numbers probably on your lens. It may be on this particular lens I have, it's not on the front, but some will be on the glass and some will be on the barrel or the body of your lens. And it will tell you, so for example, this lens that I have is a 105 millimeter and it just says 2.8. So if you remember in the very beginning, I was showing you a couple of lens examples. What were they? I think 5.3 to 6 point, no, that's not right. 5.6 to 6.3. So if you have a zoom lens and one number on your lens, like, so for example, 1:2.8, and you have a zoom, when you use, excuse me, whether you're in automatic setting, any of the 4 settings we've talked about, also quickly, you may have a scene setting in your camera. That's like another automatic setting. And if you just take a look at that, just on your own at some point, it will give you other automatic options, like shooting in candlelight or dusk or sunrise or landscape. Okay, so just know that it may be very well in your camera and you can use that as an automatic setting as well. But the reason I bring up the number on your lens is because if you have a zoom lens and it has 2 numbers, so those numbers are apertures. Okay, so what that means is when you zoom, you are going to lose light. So whether you're in automatic, the priority modes, or manual, you can have your camera set to the exposure you want. For example, let's say in the manual mode and you have no zoom. Let's say on your lens, it says, okay, 5.6 to 6.3. Okay, so 5.6 is going to give you, is going to have more light coming in compared to 6.3 aperture. When you use your zoom feature, those numbers are telling you that the lens cannot handle still 5.6 when it's in the zoom mode. It will go to 6.3. So you're going to lose some light. Okay, so the reason I tell you this is so that, or let you know this, is so that you're aware if on your lens you've got like 1:2 sets of numbers, you know, and you can even, if you like, you can go back to the automatic setting if you like. And if you have a zoom, just activate your zoom and see your aperture change. Okay, and it was like, I couldn't figure out, those years ago, I was shooting in manual and I couldn't figure out what was going on with my exposure because I thought I'm in manual mode. I've set the numbers I want. Why am I getting these changes in the exposure? And so I just kept repeating the process, zooming in, zooming out. And all of a sudden I noticed that I saw something move. And I was like, what is that? I was like, okay, well, so it's a number. There's a number moving. Okay, and then I realized that that number was the aperture. And that's what was happening. Every time I zoomed out, right, and brought the scene closer to me, then I was losing some light. And that's what the numbers on your lens will tell you. Okay, so if that was as clear as mud for anyone, just please let me know. Okay, so just know, you know, if you're in a situation on manual and you're using your zoom and all of a sudden you wonder, why are my photos getting darker? That's why. Okay, anything you want to add to that, Jolene?
I mean, that pretty much covers it. I mean, just what I would add is when you mentioned the ones with the fixed aperture or the option to keep the fixed aperture, you can have those telephoto lenses that have like a fixed f2.8 or a fixed f4, so that when you zoom in, It's just the design of the lens. I mean, I'm not a light physicist, but they managed to get it get it to zoom in without actually extending the barrel. So it's not elongating, the distance between the elements, and then you're not losing light that's coming down the barrel of the lens. That does give you the option to keep that aperture brighter.
Right, like I have a lens that's an f4, for
Yeah.
example. That's all it says on the barrel. So I know that no matter how I'm using the zoom capabilities, if I set it to f4, it will stay there. Okay, when
Yeah.
I use my 150 to 600, it's 5.6, I believe it's 5.6 to 6.3. So I know that it will not stay at 5.6 when I'm zooming. Okay, that's what that's telling me, compared to the f4, what Jolene was saying with the f2.8. So if you're shopping for a new lens, for example, that's just something to be aware of. If you want to look at lenses that have that fixed number with the zoom capability.
Yeah, Lorna, with a 1.8, there is more light coming through, but you also have a razor thin focus or like area in focus. So if you're shooting at 1.8, that is getting to the point where it's so extreme where you could have like the tip of your subject's nose in focus and everything else gets soft past that. So it is letting in more light, but it is making your depth of field more shallow, so you have less in focus. So it's a line you got to walk between the two.
Right. Yeah, there's kind of a trade-off. Okay, I am going to see if I can get myself back over here to the last set of photos to show you. Okay. All right, is anyone seeing this? A horse?
Yeah, no.
Nope.
Nope.
No, okay, hang on. I will.
Nothing yet. Yeah.
Nothing yet. Okay. Hang on, I think.
Did you hit the screen share already?
Yeah, I think now let's try this again.
Still nothing.
Nothing yet. Okay, hang on. I must have missed a step here again. Shoot, I want to be here. How did I do that? Oops. Do you see my screen? Oops, hang on, that's not where I want to be.
Yes, we see your desktop now.
Okay, I think I'm getting closer. Okay, do you see pictures now? You see my mouse and a horse?
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Perfect.
All right, awesome. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so here's an example. So I took this photo with my first digital camera, and the ISO really struggled. So I am kind of at my limits here, but you can see that, there's all kinds of grain and kind of pixelation here. And yes, I was just really attempting to capture some action, but, the lighting conditions are so challenging. But I threw this in here because it's an example of extreme digital noise for you. You can kind of see pixelation here, and I've got some green, and it's pretty crazy. So that's where just knowing the limits of your ISO with your camera, and knowing that sometimes you'll just be you may be compromising quality for memories. But as I say, the cameras are so good these days that it's definitely easier. Hey, so this is kind of just a quick comment on, composition and kind of getting down to your subject level. And also, a question you can ask yourself is, what is my subject? Okay, so what don't I need to include? Like I don't know why, the infamous garbage can, clutter in the background, just, what can you eliminate that you don't really need in your image? Okay, and then here we have up here in the eye, there's a little bit of what's called catch light. And if you're not sure where to focus, the eye is kind of the place to go. Okay, so I was lying on my stomach to get this one. Okay, this one just, you can go close. It's just an example of, this, there's no doubt really what the subject is. Okay, and here, I have a little bit of light coming in here. And then also, just if you think of kind of the guidelines, or people refer to as the rule of thirds, but really just kind of guidelines, where if you tend to keep your subject away from the middle of the image, sometimes you may want it there for various reasons, but generally, this gives a little bit of room for the subject to move. Have a little bit of sunset light starting to happen. Same here, we have some of just the element that they're in. They just happen to cooperate, and, obviously looking my way, just attempting to not have them too much in the middle, with a little bit of space here and some room to move the eye to the environment. Okay, and same here, and just, you can see there was some sunrise light happening here a little. You can see a little bit of a glint here in the eye. It's always kind of nice too, if you can get some light to the eyes of a subject. And sometimes, if it's your pet, for example, then it might even only mean moving a step or two one way or another, just to be able to catch that light. This one I put in here, if you happen to like birds or action photography, when I was first learning, and really whatever your subject is, when I first started taking bird photos, I was just really happy just to even catch them sitting on a branch, and then I started to push that, and I thought, okay, well, I'm no longer, I love the beautiful bird sitting on a branch, but I thought, okay, now let's see if I can get some, without disturbing them, obviously, but see if I can get some interaction and just some natural behavior, whether it's a bird singing, or, chickadees like to kind of hang upside down, or birds flying in. And, I have a number of photos that don't turn out. Professional photographers do too. But, it's all just an opportunity to practice and just have some fun. Okay, there's always the debate about, do you want to add a human element to a landscape photo? I just threw this one in here just because it can kind of give you an idea of kind of the scope of the size and the grandeur of things, even though, we kind of block it off here compositionally. It's not a super strong photo, but just one example of bringing in the human element. I kind of resisted that idea for a long time, and I use it more now, but I still like to kind of mix it up. Some of my landscape, I'm quite happy to have a human element in, whether it's even a picnic table or a chair or a person, and other times I'm going just for the landscape. Okay, so I put this one in for you. Again, this can be personal choice, but kind of the suggestion is thinking of, what do you want the strong point to be? So would it be your sky? Would it be the foreground? Okay, and then having 2/3 of your image being what you want to portray, rather than having the horizon go straight through the middle. Okay. Sometimes, if you have really nice reflections, maybe if you're in the mountains, or depending on the landscape or what it is you're photoing, obviously that's your choice, and what works for you. But just for some composition guidelines, it's just something to think about. Where is your horizon line, and what's the strong point, the foreground or the sky? And same here, the sky's pretty, there's no brilliant sunrise or sunset, right? So then I'm going to focus more on what the foreground is, and kind of the main subject that I wanted to capture. Okay, this is an example, it's not a super strong example, but it is one where I've used these trees for what's referred to a bit as framing. So there's nowhere really for the eye to go beyond the outside of these trees. So you force the viewer to come into your image. Okay, and then kind of an example of a leading line, if you will, for composition, right? There's room to come all the way through. Again, you know, those super foggy, frosty days we had, so that, you know, the sky's pretty almost, I mean, it is beautiful, but it's still kind of bland in a way. But again, just an idea of a leading line for you. Okay, and then there's a photographer, Brian Patterson, and he was the first person that I really heard say this over and over. He has this expression about, you know, when is the best time to take a horizontal or a landscape, you know, is right after a portrait. You know, this was just an example of, you know, one orientation going to another. Okay, and just, you know, so just feeling free to, you know, experiment with your vertical portrait landscape, or your your vertical portrait, or your horizontal in a landscape, just for a different look. Lighting is so much of everything. You know, if you could just start, if you don't already, just observe, you know, there's that golden hour of sunrise and sunset. And I threw this one in and the next one just to show you the images aren't quite the same, but it's almost in the same place. Okay, we do have some light on here, but if you look at the trees from this image to this image, okay, now we've got some sunset light happening here. So you can see how it just really changes the mood of the trees, you know, or whatever your subject is. Okay, and then again here, an example of, you know, 1/3 foreground here, because I really wanted this sky, just the storm clouds and the setting sun. Okay, that was the strong point for me. Okay, and then just so quickly wrap up here for you. If you haven't already, and we can take a minute here, or if it's something just to put on your, just to do check, is what do you have for a file size that you're shooting with? And why I bring this up is I like to shoot in a large file size. Yes, it does not allow for as many photos on the memory card, but what it does allow for is it gives me a whole range of options for what if I want to produce enlargements of any kind, or poster size photos, right? You can always come down in size, but if you're shooting, say if I was shooting here at 6 megapixels and I wanted to create, you know, a big, beautiful banner, or even just, you know, when you want a high resolution or good quality image, and the file size is too small, you're not going to be able to get the quality or necessarily the enlargements that you want. And I learned that the hard way, way back in the beginning. So, you know, it is personal preference, but my suggestion always is, even if you're just shooting in JPEG and you don't want to go to the larger file of the raw file format, is shoot in the largest file size, because then you know that you've got the picture data that you need, you know, that McBain's can work with for you for your enlargements or whatever it is that you might want for good quality photos. Like I say, you can always come down, but you can't always go up. And like I say, for the 2 card slot, one of the things I've started doing is I shoot in the raw file in one slot, and I use the second slot as a backup in JPEG. So, you know, yes, I have duplicates, but I've learned to appreciate, I kind of like the comfort of knowing that I have that. So again, personal choice, but I would say, you know, if you can check your file size and your megapixel setting as well, if you have those as 2 different settings, and just check that you're on which setting you're on, right? And then if you want to go to the highest JPEG quality, if that's what you like to use, and the largest file size. Okay, so now I can get myself back. All right, so wow, congratulations for hanging in there, because we covered a lot of material tonight. If you have, okay, I see we have some messages. If anyone would like to unmute, if you have any questions or comments or anything you would like addressed before we close for tonight, then please feel free to unmute. Give everyone a minute here. You're still there, Jolene?
I'm here. My camera's just giving me grief.
Okay.
How do we get the video?
Like the recording from tonight?
Yes.
If you email workshop@mcbaincamera.com, you can I can get you the link to it.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's Anne Marie again. I'm just curious again about I have a telephoto lens. So it's 18 to 400 millimeters.
Okay.
And the f is 3.5 to 6.3.
Okay.
So when I'm looking to take a picture far away, are you suggesting I need to then increase the ISO?
Yes, you could. So you could increase the ISO, Anne Marie, or you could decide if you wanted to just tweak your aperture setting just a little bit to allow in some more light. Or you could slow down your shutter speed slightly. But if you want to leave those alone, then yes, I would suggest that you can increase your ISO.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Can I get that, where to send for the video?
I popped it into the chat. It's just workshop@mcbaincamera.com.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
And then Anne Marie, the one thing just to keep in the back of your mind is, you know, when you're using your ISO, if you're in a really low light area to begin with, is just to think about how high are you using, how high are you setting your ISO? All right, so does anyone else have any questions? I know we've gone over, and you know, I would like to just thank everyone for being here and your participation, and thank you for the opportunity for me to share some of my ideas and tips and techniques with you. And you know, I hope you've found something valuable to take away and learned a few things about your camera and to experiment with and just have fun. Thank you, Anne Marie. And, you know, if I think Jolene would agree, if you have questions that come up as a result of this, you know, please feel free to get in touch with Jolene. And between the two of us, we will make sure that any questions that you have whatsoever will be handled, and every question is fair game.
Absolutely. If you do have any questions, like I said, just email me at workshop. And I can move them along to Angie if they're more specific to her, or I can do my best to answer them. I apologize, my camera's not coming back on. I don't know what is going on, but it's not cooperating. So
Well, I'm happy we've got your voice, Jolene.
yeah, well, I'm gonna try and make as big a presence as I can with just my voice. So.
You're rocking it. You are rocking it.
Well, thank you guys. Thanks everyone for coming out and hanging out for us and learning with us. And I hope that you did learn a great deal. And if, yeah, I mean, please shoot us a line if you have any questions or want to touch on anything on a future workshop that we could maybe do together. We're always open to suggestions.
Yeah, and one last thing, if I may too, Jolene, if any of you have comments that you would like to leave with Jolene about, you know, anything that you particularly liked about this evening, how we ran this, if anything you would like to see changed, you know, we are definitely welcome and open to ideas. You're welcome to share them. You know, that helps me get better and serve you better. So feel free to pop her some comments.
Absolutely. Always appreciated. Well, I think we're going to wrap things up for tonight. Thanks again, everybody. sorry it went a little bit late, but I feel like the more information we can cram in, the better, making sure you're getting your time's worth. So
Yeah, we crammed a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate you taking time out of your evening and your schedules to join us this evening. Have
And
fun
thank you,
with
Angie.
your cameras.
Thank you.
You're
Angie,
welcome.
can I just ask you a couple, just two quick questions here? If that's kind of the last piece, then everyone else doesn't have to stick around.
Yeah, everyone feel free to log off if you're all finished up, and we'll just finish up the Q&A for those who want to stick around.
For like, shooting pictures of wildlife and like kind of around sunset times, like birds going back to the water or something like that. I find that like it's hard sometimes depending on like the bird can be quite silhouetted and like it's kind of dark and depending on the light. Is there, and part of that is just going to be the time of day and it just kind of sucks to suck, but is there a particular way to try to mitigate that or something you can do to try to help with that?
Yeah, so a couple of things I've discovered, Lucas, is because there's one place I like to photo birds going back to the water, but I find I'm always on the wrong side of them for the light.
Yeah.
Right there. I'm on the back side of the light, they're flying into it. So one can be, if I can get myself into a different position so that the light is on the front of them. And the other thing then is I will, in those situations, I would go into manual mode. So especially, if I'm fortunate enough that, say there's a fairly, like in the fall, right, or in the spring, there's a, relatively steady stream of Canada geese, for example. And I can manage to get just a few test shots in, then I will go to manual. Because that gives me, I find it gives me a better opportunity to have a photo then correctly exposed and I don't end up with that silhouette situation.
Okay. Okay. And for shots like that, you're typically not going above like 3200 ISO. You're kind of managing based on your shutter speed and your aperture to try to control the light more so than increasing the ISO.
That's my preference. Yeah, I generally don't like to get much over about 400 ISO unless I need to. It's just kind of a preference.
Okay.
And because with my bird and wildlife lens, like it's the 150 to 600, then I'm usually just at 6.3, and I just have my aperture always just as open as it will go. And then I'll tweak my shutter speed a little bit, depending what I think I can get away with. And then you're right, then I would go to my ISO.
Okay. Okay. And then last thing, and then I'll leave you alone.
No, that's okay.
For like in my camera, I have like an image quality setting. And in there's like JPEG normal, there's RAW, there's RAW F, RAW N, RAW B, and fine. Is there one that you typically suggest over others or?
So Jolene, I'll throw that one to you because in my camera, I'm either I think in RAW or and fine or not. So with all those options that we just heard, do you have a thought on that one?
Shooting Sony?
It's a Nikon.
It's Nikon, okay.
Z50.
Z, yeah, they have their new non-compressed. Okay, so can you read me those names again? Because I know that they have, yeah, just read me the JPEG ones again.
So there's JPEG normal.
Yeah.
There's NEF RAW plus JPEG fine. NEF RAW plus JPEG normal. NEF RAW plus JPEG basic. Just NEF RAW.
Okay, yeah, so those are the options for shooting. Like you can shoot just the raw file, or you can shoot a raw file and a JPEG, and it'll save both to the card. And then the normal, the fine, those are referring to the JPEG file. So I would go, so my preference is to shoot fine or like the highest quality JPEG. But that's because I'm a lazy photographer and I don't often edit my photos. So I will shoot in RAW and almost never touch the RAW file and just take the fine JPEG and throw that onto social media, because if that's all I'm doing with it, all I need is a JPEG.
Right.
So saving the RAW file, it's down to what you want to do with the files. So if you want to shoot in RAW, pick one of the options that has a RAW option with it. So I would almost always go RAW but that's again,
So Janine,
just
there's two ways he could do that. Am I right? Because I was just looking at my Nikon here too. So because I think the one thing I do, which is, I guess, kind of what you're saying, is because I have two. Do you have two memory card slots, Lucas?
not in the 50.
No,
Oh, no. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so I would honestly, like, what do you tend to do with your photos the most, or what do you want to be able to do with them? And that would kind of determine what I would suggest.
honestly, that's a great question. I bought this camera not long ago before I went on a trip to the Amazon.
Woo,
And like
wow.
it's unfortunate I bought it at the time that I did. I should have bought it earlier because I mostly just shot in automatic. I didn't really know how to use the camera, but I was just glad to have something to take pictures of.
Yeah.
So I haven't, like, I don't know how to edit things. I don't know how much work that entails either. So like, I'd like to try it out, but maybe it would be too overwhelming for me. I don't know.
Honestly, yeah, I don't think it would be too overwhelming. Do you have like Photoshop or Lightroom?
No, I have nothing.
Okay. Because like to shoot in RAW means you have to be able to edit or run the file through a software that can read the NEF file, which would be Photoshop or Lightroom, or I think there are some open source softwares that might be free. I'm not overly familiar with them, but it has to go through a software before you can even get the JPEG out of the RAW file. So it's not, a RAW file isn't going to do you any good if you don't have the software to read it. Oh, Capture One. Thank you, Quinn. So Capture One is another one that can read it, but so that one is nice because it's a one-time fee as opposed to Photoshop, which is a monthly fee. So if you want to get a software that can read it so that you can start editing your files, those are great places to start. In the meantime, I would shoot in the highest quality JPEG that you can. So JPEG, their fine format on Nikon, I think it's the high quality one. So I would shoot in that.
Okay. Okay.
And one thing you could do too, Lucas, is, you know, if sort of editing is feeling a bit overwhelming for you in the beginning, is, you know, if you're going on a special trip somewhere, or, you know, you have a special occasion, is thinking of using the memory card with the RAW plus fine, even if it means, you know, you might label that card and just keep it somewhere safe, and, you know, switch to another card and carry on with JPEG in the short term. You know, I'm not sure what you think of that idea, but I mean, I hung around in JPEG for a long time before I made the leap to shooting in RAW.
Yeah, and honestly, like I said, if 90% of what you do with your photos is make small prints or post them on social media, you don't need a RAW file for that. It's honestly just going to eat up more memory than it's worth. So just shoot with the fine JPEG to start with until you think you might be ready to start doing some editing or like blowing up your pictures a little bit bigger. But just start with a fine JPEG.
Cool.
Does that help, Lucas?
Yeah, that does.
Great.
Thank you very much. I appreciate both
No
of your
worries.
guys' time and your input. Thanks.
No worries.
You know, and I think quickly, you know, talking about trips, one of the suggestions that was shared with me a while ago is the idea of, rather than taking, one huge memory card, for example, and putting all of your trip photos on one card, the suggestion from this one photographer was take several cards and split the trip up onto different cards. their logic was, and if anything happens to the one card, you still have other trip photos. Again, I think that's personal preference. For some people, that's not what they want to do. And someone else might think, oh, yeah, that's maybe not a bad idea. I just might do that.
Yeah, the handling of memory is so personal. I know several
is.
photographers who literally have never deleted a photo off of a memory card.
Me too. I know
So,
one.
and I just find that baffling because I can't afford memory cards, so I have to format them frequently.
Yeah, I have become very diligent at, or well, much more diligent at deleting. And I was listening to photographer one time. He had this course, and his rationale is if you start deleting, the non-keepers, you will end up, he said, even if you go on a photo shoot and save, say, 3 or 5 of your best photos, you will over time end up with a really great collection of photos. And as you improve, you can just replace them. And I just, I'm kind of like with Jolene too. And I just don't want to be having a whole, thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of photos hanging around. I know people that it doesn't bother at all, but it bothers me.
Yeah, there's no right way to handle memory.
Yeah, personal preference, as you say, Jolene.
Yeah. Well, does anyone else have any other questions or comments that are pressing at the moment? I think we'll maybe end things there then.
You bet.
Beauty. Thank you guys so much.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Thanks for hanging in here for so long. And thank you so much, Jolene.
Oh, anytime. Glad to be here. I'm looking forward to more events or more workshops like this. So everyone,
Cool,
keep
me
your
too.
eyes peeled on McBain's website for any more workshops and events. And we'll be seeing you later.
Thanks,
All
Jolene.
right.
Thanks, Angie.
You're
Thanks,
very
Jolene.
welcome. Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Good night.
Good night, guys.
Bye.